According to some records, Boxing Day got its name due to the tradition of masters giving their servants the day off on this day, complete with a special gift box for them to enjoy. Well, I'm a servant of the British Broadcasting Corporation, so my dear employer has given me a gift to unwrap. Not one, but two great thinkers, occasional drinkers, musicians, producers, ignorance reducers. If I can be completely honest, though, the BBC have got me the same present 3 years running now. But I won't take them back to the shop. It is time for our traditional Yuletide chat with Brian Eno and Brian Cox. Good day to you, fellas.
Good day to you.
Can I ask you a question?
This is against the grain.
Did you first come up with the idea of this purely because we're both called Brian? Is that the only reason that we're here?
What was it? I'm trying to remember the absolute genesis of it. I think that it goes back to something even more reductive than that, which is the idea of three wise men. But of course, the maths doesn't add up because there's only two wise men and me. So that
Come
doesn't
on,
work.
you can be included.
I can bluff with the best of them. But yeah, there's something about three Brians, three wise men that following the star of illumination away from the darkness of ignorance, but something like that.
You were only able to get two.
Well, or have we? Or have we? Do you remember last year when we brutally crowbarred in an extra Brian?
Yes.
We're going to do the same this year.
No.
Yes.
Who
Do you
will
remember
that
how much
be?
we enjoyed that? You just wait. That's going to be part of the Christmas surprise, even though it's Boxing Day.
But Brian's enjoying it so much that he's already started playing with a double pendulum.
With my miniature double pendulum.
Blue tacked to the table.
We're going to get on to perfect Christmas presents for the Bryans in a little while. One of them, we will have to unpack the idea of the double pendulum as well. But I should set the scene because we're not in a studio. You can probably tell by the ambient miking situation, you audiophiles, that we're in a special space, a sacred space. We're in Brian Eno's. What would you describe it as? It's a working space for you, isn't it?
Yeah. Used to be a stable.
Okay.
It was a stable for this whole muse, so this used to be full of horses.
Do you find this a meditative place to work because there's a lot of light? And we were just talking to Joe, your assistant, about how you like to bulk buy as many occasionally dodgy speakers from electrical shops as possible to put these sound systems together in here, don't you?
I've probably got 60 odd speakers in here, I would say.
Yeah.
Something like that. I mean, there's only about 20 of them connected at the moment, but
and a lot of breeze blocks. It's quite industrial as well, which is what I like.
Yeah, breeze blocks I like. They are stable, cheap. You can move them around easily.
They're functional, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. A bit like you.
Stable and cheap.
And you can move it around easily.
Stable, cheap, portable, and functional. Yeah. The six music presenter Shaun Keaveny. That's the ultimate strapline for me. Okay, we set the scene. It's always a really enjoyable part of the year for me. But it's also quite daunting because while we've got two brains, we want to get to as many great points as possible. I'm going to start with a bit of... I'm going to ask something about modern music, actually, whilst we're in a studio space with Brian Eno and Brian Cox, two people who are no strangers to the recording studio. I was having a conversation with my 10-year-old a few weeks ago, and because of the wonders of streaming now, you're in the car, you can put any music on from any era of music that you wish. And my kids are at that strange age where they've got one foot in the past, the sort of stuff that Dad likes.
Yeah.
But they also love the really ultra modern stuff, you know. But even my eldest son we were listening to one of these pop acts, and he said he's finding so much auto-tune, isn't there, Dad, these days?
Did he?
Yeah.
Really?
He really picked up on it, and he spots it every time. And I just wanted to push a little music question out there about that, about the fact that a lot of modern music seems to have removed natural sound almost altogether, and it just makes me wonder what you think the future is for the human voice. You know, if we're talking about 300 or 400 or 500 years in the future, is it something that it almost seems already that young people are sort of losing that connection maybe with a normally recorded acoustic voice with little imperfections? What do you think is going to happen as we move forwards?
Well, I think we're already seeing what's happening. First of all, there's a reaction against auto-tune. So you now have bands who have really bad singers, deliberately bad singers, who are off time, off tune, and very, very organic in the way they sound, And then you have another reaction, which is singers who can really copy what auto-tune does, but it sounds absolutely beautiful. So I think one of the things that always happens with electronics is that something is done that is humanly impossible, and then somebody learns to copy it. And suddenly it becomes a human thing again. So there are now lots of singers, also particularly in the Arab world, actually, because the Arab singers were the first to really get into these strange effects you could get with auto-tuning. And now there are people who actually can sing like that. They've learnt to do it.
It's almost like when you hear about birds mimicking mobile phone signals and things like that, isn't it? It's like the natural world reclaiming something that's completely electronic and technological.
Well, another example is that great drummer Jojo Mayer.
I think you showed us him last year, actually.
Yeah,
incredible.
Well, he's an amazing drummer. He learnt to do drum and bass drumming, but as a human.
Yeah.
Now, drum and bass drumming came completely out of computers. Nobody could ever drum like that until it existed, and then somebody learnt to drum like that. So I think it's a very interesting thing about humans. They always try to exceed their technologies in a way.
Thank God for that.
What interests me is whether computer-composed music will ever approach the power
the emotional
of human-composed music. Because obviously there are these computers that play Go, for example, the famous, which is extremely difficult to do. And those computers are now exceeding human capabilities. And that's a creative game. Mm-hmm. And we don't know how precisely that, or even how, in any sense, I think the computers are playing. They're teaching themselves. So I'm interested to listen. There must be computer-composed music. There is, isn't there? But
you were listening to someone you came in here.
Oh, was I?
That's what I was playing when you came in, yes.
So that was composed by...
Well, by me and a computer. So it's algorithmic music, basically. So I kind of wrote the algorithms, you could say. But then once they start behaving, they're doing something that I didn't predict. So
well, in fact,
a little bit like that, actually.
You've got Bloom as well, haven't you? The app.
Yeah, so that's another example. Yeah.
Which I downloaded the other day for the reason that because it's an interactive app, obviously, isn't it? Like you say, so you've got the algorithms already there, but then the other human interface comes in and sort of starts to create their own music from that. Is that partially with a view to just for fun, just to get people into music, or do you eventually envisage that people will make, really meaningful albums of their own out of that and stuff?
I think so, yeah. I mean, Bloom was interesting because it's been out 10 years now. So this is the 10th anniversary of it this month. One of the effects has been that a lot of people who would probably not have got into music have, according to their accounts to me, been able to get into music through this. They've found a way of becoming musicians, basically. Well, I mean, I found a way of becoming a musician because of recording studios. I can't really play anything, but I do know how to make a studio work. And it's a little bit like, I can't cook, but I do know how to buy the right ingredients and put them together. Or let's say I can't grow food, but I can cook, for example. So there are different stages in the process of making something that you can decide to be involved in.
Make it creative for yourself.
Mm-hmm. It raises interesting questions about what it means to be human. It goes into areas about artificial intelligence, for example.
Yeah.
I had a long discussion a couple of weeks ago about general AIs. So what we're good at now is building specific artificial intelligences that can do specific things. For example, compose music or play chess and so on, or be expert systems. But then the question about whether you can build something that really has the capabilities of a human across the whole spectrum of human behaviour, which you need to be a great... music is a synthesis of a vast array of human talents and behaviours, isn't it, all focused down. So you can't quite put your finger on why a particular performance is magical and another performance isn't, because it's complicated.
Yeah. That's why it's different from Go or chess, for example, because one of the things that you do when you engage in a creative cultural form like music is that you write the rules each time. That's part of the game, that you are rethinking the rules. You're making new rules, and making new objectives as well, which is different from something like Go or chess, where the objective is clear
and simple, I suppose, in a sense, but with an almost infinite number of iterations.
Yeah,
that's true. So you have to train an AI. Really, you have to know what is the goal. What are you supposed to do? So you can't say compose. Well, you can say compose a piece of music, I suppose, but the goal of a human composer is different to that, isn't it? It's to express a whole range of emotions.
It's to evoke an emotion, and that's something that goes back to your original point, which is how far down the line with AI do we have to get before they can start to recreate that connection to emotions. I've got another.
Would you say that they're genuinely creative? What kind of language would you use to speak of the algorithms that are helping you compose, or indeed composing music?
When this whole movement first started, really, was with people like John Cage tossing coins to make musical decisions. So that's a very simple form of an algorithm being used in composition. So you identify a few options in a piece of music, and then instead of making a conscious choice between them, you toss a coin to make the choice. So that isn't very far from what computer music is doing now, actually, to be honest. There are more choices, and there are more complicated choices, but the act of judgment is still being made by the human, and that's the important part, that the human is still the critical judge in the feedback loop. What's interesting to me is whether there's anything like a sort of Turing test that you can use with musical composition. Could you present people several pieces of music, some of the which were completely made by humans, some of which were made by sort of mixture of human and chance operations, and some of which were made by algorithms? Would people know the difference?
Yeah.
That's a fascinating thought. That I think the ultimate Turing test for music would be: would a computer be able to create a piece of music that could move somebody to tears, for instance? That would be the ultimate aim, wouldn't it? Which that might be 1,000 years off, No,
I don't think so.
No,
I think that might be.
Really?
I think that might be 5 or 8 years off.
No.
Yeah.
Well, you should know, to be fair. I mean, I would defer to your extra level of capability on that.
I know you want to move on, but it's not only in the complexity of the performance, is it? Because if you look at a musical score, like you look at Mahler's Ninth, for example, it is actually a very small amount of information. It's a well-defined number of dots on it. There's not many bits in it.
Yeah.
So there's something else that comes out of those melodies.
Absolutely, yes. So the part of the information that isn't defined in the score is all the cultural heritage of the players, the whole history of making those instruments. Yeah. I mean, instrument building is often left out of the story, but that's absolutely critical. Think of the grand piano. When people talk to me about, music's getting so technical now, blah, blah, I say, have you ever looked inside a grand piano? It's the most complicated machine you can imagine, So it's always been a question of people interacting with technology, except for pure singing. But even, that's a technology too, in your throat. Yeah. It's not the one that we happen to have built, but it still is one. And if you watch an opera singer training, it's quite clear they're working on this thing as a piece of technology. And they find ways of optimizing it and ways of suppressing aspects of it. Yeah,
that's fantastic. It's just a fascinating thought, really. Just the idea that the human voice, the sound of the human voice, because obviously the history of recorded music, it's very, very recent, really, isn't it? Yeah. And before then, everything was it was a performance that happened in that moment, around that campfire, in that auditorium, and then it was lost forever. Yeah. And there was a great beauty to that. But recorded music has completely flipped the idea of what music is, hasn't it?
Yes. So now we're in another phase, which is generative music, which is what I do, which is using all of the technologies of recording to create music that doesn't ever repeat. So recording, we had this sort of 120-year blip in the history of human listening, where you could hear exactly the same thing over and over again. That's what I grew up listening to, records, not concerts, really. Concerts were rare events. Most of your experience was of listening to an identical piece of music. Heartbreak Hotel is still the same now as it was in 1958 or whenever it came out. But then during the 90s and onwards, people started doing remixes, for example. So suddenly you lost the idea of a piece of music of being one particular fixed set of notes and so on in relation to each other. Suddenly a piece of music was a kind of envelope for a lot of different experimental possibilities. But now I think with generative music like Bloom and other, I wonder if the audience knows what we're talking about. Well, it just suddenly
you're going to have to tap
me.
it into your chosen app store.
Sean's never asked that question. No, his career would not have lasted this long.
It's a very salient point that Brian makes. Never complain, never explain has been one of my great maxims. But yeah, but it is this, like you say, a generative music app, isn't it? And I see what you're saying, that the idea being that it's constantly changing, it's never quite the same.
So the piece of music, instead of being a really specific set of sonic relationships, becomes instead a sort of envelope of possibilities of things that could happen, and each time you listen to it, a particular different bundle of those happens. It's a little bit, when you first came in, I showed you this double pendulum on my wall here. It's a little bit like that. It's quite a simple system, but each time you let it fall, it does something different.
Completely random.
But there are certain things that it won't do. So there is an envelope, there's an edge to its possibilities. It's not going to suddenly walk across the room or turn
make itself
red
a cup
or something.
Of tea. Well, I mean, it seems the perfect moment to go from talking about the almost endless possibilities of music to playing the Shaun Keaveny Christmas song. I'm joking, Phil. We aren't going to do that. That would be dereliction of duty, and
Poor
also it would be inappropriate in the extreme.
Is that real? Is there actually a Shaun Keaveny Christmas?
Can you believe he's asking that? I mean, it's up there with "Merry Christmas, Everybody" by Slade. It's one of the it's a desultory Christmas song that didn't even make the top 200, and we won't be hearing it here.
Six Music.
Six Music.
This New Year's Eve.
2018 is nearly over. A brand new year is nearly here, and as we transition into 2019, we're going to start it off in a big way.
This is how we have to do it.
Soulwax and Errol Alkan.
We're in Soulwax.
We do tracks that we think were really great, doing it in our own studio, and we're even in the mix that we made for you guys.
See you later.
Then with me, Errol Alkan, I'll be curating 3 hours of some of my favourite tracks as we head into 2019 together, alongside a few classics as well.
Soulwax's New Year's Eve house party from 7.
It's really exciting.
Okay, let's do it.
And Errol Alkan from 10.
Do join me
on BBC Radio.
Six Music.
Well, I stay so worried all the time. There's something keeps troubling me in the back of my mind. Am I a fool for being in love? I wanna know. Yeah, I'm taking off. What does it take to understand this man? I know I love him and I don't know why. Tell me why every time he leaves me I break down and cry. Listen, I love him more than life itself. Don't have no feeling for nobody
we are with Brian Eno and Brian Cox in Brian's work studio. And we're talking a little bit to start with about music and about the endless possibilities thereof. But I wanted to ask a sort of simple question to both of you. You're both recording artists. Let's not forget Brian Cox. You know, you've laid down a fair few tracks in your time with different incarnations, different bands. To each of you, the same question: what has been your best day of work in a recording studio?
Yeah, that's quite a difficult question because I've had so many days in the studio.
It's like a favourite child, isn't it?
But I suppose one day I can remember that was like a magic day was I was working with Bowie in Berlin on the album that became Heroes. And I said to him one night, do you know what, we should get Fripp in to play on some of these things. Robert Fripp, great guitar player who I'd worked with, and David said, yeah, that's a good idea, let's call him. So he called him, and Robert said, I'll be on the next plane. He was in New York at the time, we were in Berlin. And indeed, he arrived about 8 hours later from New York with his guitar. And we said, well, do you want to hear the stuff then, hear the material? And he said, no, just plug me in and I'll play on it. So we plugged him in through my little synthesizer. I used to play with the sound, his guitar sound, as it came through the synth. And we just had put all the tracks on one reel of multi-track tape. So they just came one after the other. We plugged him in and he played each track without ever hearing it in advance. He's such a great player that he can negotiate that, you know, he sort of guesses what's going to happen next. And so nearly every guitar contribution he made on that record, in fact every one I think was made in a 5-hour period. And I remember saying to him, there was one of the songs that had a particularly odd part of the chord sequence, and I said, Robert, I think I should at least give you a clue about this one. He said, Captain, I don't want any clues.
That's like West Country Burr as well.
I was trying to do the West Country accent. Yeah. Yeah. He always used to call me Captain.
Captain. That's so sweet.
And there's a picture of us from that day, the three of us in the studio, and we're all laughing like mad. It was, the other thing about it was very, very funny because David was very funny indeed, and he and I used to do this Pete and Dud routine always. That was how we talked to each other. And funnily enough, Robert fitted in perfectly to that. It became Pete, Dud and Rob for the day. So.
Just madcap humour in the studio in Berlin. I've got a little bit of David Bowie-related ephemera that I want to ask you both about. So let's come back after a couple of songs after 2 o'clock.
Hello.
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 Hello, music lover.
Music is
Addictive. If you want to lean in and if you want to turn it up.
I don't care about the format, I only care about the music.
Music is the best possible way to start the day.
Wherever it comes from all manner of genres.
It's got to be a piece of music that's going to change your life.
It's just really satisfying. It's always a thrill, isn't it?
You really want to feel something. You want it to touch the very core of your soul.
Ooh, that's an exciting sound. That sounded like the future.
You're in for a treat with your first act of the weekend.
Live in Maida Vale. An exquisite live session. Thank you so much.
Everybody that works here is obsessed with music.
That's why it's the station for music lovers.
This is BBC Radio 6 Music.
6 Music.
What you do to me, I know, I can't believe there's something about you got me down on my knees. What you do to me, I know, I can't believe there's something about you got me down on my knees. What you do to me, 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 what you do to me. I know, I can't believe there's something about you got me down on my knees. What you do to me, I know, I What you do to me, what you do to me, what you do to me.
Six Music.
Spent a week in a dusty library, waiting for some words to jump in me. We met by a trick of fate. French Navy, my sailor maid. We met by the moon and the silvery lake. You came my way, said I want you to stay. You with your dietary restriction said you love me with a lot of conviction. I was waiting to be struck by lightning, waiting for somebody excited like you. Oh, the thing that you do, you make me go ooh. With the thing that you do, you do, you do. I wanted to control it, but love, I couldn't hold it. I wanted to control it, but love, I couldn't hold it. I'll be criticized for lending at my heart. I was criticized for letting you break my heart. Why would I stand for disappointed legs? Fully grown, but I'm on tender hers. Ooh, with the legs on tender hers. Ooh, with the legs, the legs, the legs. I wanted to control it, but love, I couldn't hold it. I wanted to control it, but love, I couldn't hold Relationships were something I used to do. Convince me they are better for me and you. We met by a trick of fate. French Navy, my sailor. I wanted to control it, but love, I couldn't hold it. I wanted to control it, but love, I couldn't hold it. I wanted to control it, but love, I couldn't hold it. I wanted to control it, but love, I couldn't
You find me here in Brian Eno's studio in London with another Brian. Of course, I'm talking about Professor Brian Cox. And we're having our annual get-together. It's relatively Yuletide time. And we're just talking about anything and everything that comes up, really. Well, I did mention it in the last half hour, and I just wanted to touch on this. I watched again on YouTube the other day that fantastic clip of Newsnight, I think it was, from 1999, when David Bowie's talking to Jeremy Paxman, and it genuinely makes me laugh like a drain every time I watch it, because it's what happens when the past meets the future. It's David Bowie talking about the future of his music, and David just says, well, everything's going to be on the internet, and everybody's music's going to be on the internet, and it's going to just get pumped into your living room or onto your phone or wherever you are, and that's how we're going to consume it. And Paxman just couldn't. He's an extraordinarily cerebral man himself, but he couldn't take the concept in. He was sort of almost mocking of the idea, and it's so shocking to see how much of a futurologist David always was, and how right he was about that. But I just wanted to ask what your predictions for 2039 might be, as far as if we could cast you in the David Bowie position there, what kind of things whether it be in culture, in music, environmentally, what you think are going to be the sort of headlines for something that's 2039, the next 20 years? Where are we going to be?
I can see large-scale geoengineering. For instance, putting up layers of sulfate particles in the stratosphere to prevent global warming or to slow it down. So that's my prediction, that geoengineering will be a big part of our future.
But are you saying that there is a possibility that we can cling on to, that technology might save the environment? Because we've heard some cataclysmic predictions from the UN and from the White House itself recently, and obviously people like the Donald are completely ignoring it. Do you think that we still might possibly be able to save ourselves with technology then?
Yes, I think it will be one of the things we'll have to do. We won't be in a position of being able to pick and choose and say, oh, we only want wind power, or we only want this, or we're going to have to do everything. We're going to have clean nuclear power, for example, which most people don't like the idea of, but actually is a very good bridging technology. And I think we're going to have to geoengineer. And of course the trouble is that if you say geoengineering to people, they say, oh good, so we don't have to worry about anything else, we'll just fix it technically. No, we won't just fix it technically. We'll have to do geoengineering and everything else.
And clean up our act in general, I would have thought.
That's right.
Yeah, it's quite in a sense, it's pessimistic as well as optimistic, because it presupposes that we're not going to be able to take the decisions fast enough now. The politics is stuck, and I'm sure that's right. We'll move there eventually, but it comes down to politicians and our political systems not being capable of acting on models and acting on the best understanding and the best predictions that we have. So it comes down to a lack of understanding of the science, really. But I think that's probably right. The effects will have to get worse before we act. And every model says that by the time the effects get worse, we will have to do much more, as Brian said, than just completely revise the way that we produce energy. We'll also have to take some actions to mitigate the problems. So, and it's a dangerous, as Brian said, it's a dangerous line to take, because it's not to suggest that we carry on as we are, and then when it all gets suddenly bad, then we'll have a couple of years where we switch everything off and do some geoengineering and it'll all be fine. It gets much more expensive and much more difficult and much more problematic, and the natural disasters and the catastrophes and the droughts and the floods get worse and worse. And at some point, I suppose, public opinion and politicians wake up. Yeah. And I suppose the prediction is by that time, we will have to do something more than just what we could do now. If we did it now, and we really made a serious investment in solar and wind power, and nuclear power is the one that's really available for many countries at the moment. If we did that now, we wouldn't have to do the geoengineering, it seems. Mm-hmm. But we're not going to do it now, to be realistic, because people don't. And I think I said the other day on Twitter or somewhere that I think the divide now in politics is between people that understand modelling and people that don't.
Yes.
Or respond to modelling. Yeah. And that may be economic, or it may be climate-based, or some other kind of modelling. But it's that basic idea that modelling is the best you can do. So you can't predict the future with accuracy, but you can predict a range of outcomes with some kind of probability, and you can quantify your level of certainty or uncertainty in those predictions. We can actually do that. And if you think we can't, then we've had it, haven't we? We can't do anything. So we all use modelling in our everyday lives. Obviously, even the weather forecast is an obvious example. Yeah. I mean, we know that we do understand that if it says it's going to rain tomorrow with a 70% chance, we take an umbrella. We sort of know that.
The problem is that politics has become less and less about modelling and about creating sort of structures of knowledge, and more about ideological issues. So, the whole outright thing is about the rejection of science, the rejection of the successes of liberal thinking, if you like, of Enlightenment thinking and whatever happened after it, in favour of an idea that has no support, actually, an ideological position. And actually, this would bring me to another prediction. Sorry, I know it's not my turn to make another prediction. But what I think we will see is the decline of government as the important force for creating social change, or as an important force. I think what's happening more and more now is that people are realizing, sometimes in not the most nice ways, that they have to take matters into their own hands. A friend of mine wrote a book a few years ago about the number of NGOs and sort of pressure groups existing in the United States now. And there are several million of them, so nearly everyone belongs to some kind of group that is taking some aspects of politics into their own hands. What they're essentially saying is that this isn't being handled by politicians, so we're going to look after it. And sometimes that's wonderful, you know, when people decide that they're going to start caring for homeless people, or they're going to start looking after countries that we're not sending aid to or that we're crippling with debt. But sometimes it's not so good when they turn into neo-Nazi militia, you know. But actually, I think that politics will be less and less of a force in our lives in the immediate future.
I think we need a broader education, in particular in the subjects that politicians tend to study.
Yes.
But we need some science there, because a lot of politicians you see today, because they've come up through the arts or social sciences, and that it's true that in those areas you make your own reality. But there's also nature, right? There is science, which is the study of something that really doesn't care what your opinion is. Right? Gravity
isn't going to be changed by your opinion.
No, and obviously the way that we live on this planet is an interaction between the two. Yeah. So there's a component of the way you organise your societies, but there's also a component of, for example, the way the climate responds to greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
And that balance requires wisdom. I mean, it worries me what you said. You might be right about the declining influence of government, but I think that parliamentary democracy, where essentially what you're doing, if you think about it, although it's unfashionable, is electing a series of people who become experts, because their whole job is to sit there and listen to debates and drill down through parliamentary committees and all that into issues, and then make decisions on our behalf. That's why we don't have direct democracy. We have a buffer of experts who are the MPs, whose job it is to weigh these things, right? To weigh the organisation of society against nature and science. But I think we can't throw that out. We need to remember that, I think, Western liberal democracy, as it's often known, but let's say that's not right anymore, just liberal democracy, because it's present all over the world now. That way of organising things has worked. Right? If you want evidence, it's worked.
Yeah, I agree.
So that worries me.
It's just not working now. But I think what happens in societies is that the ruling structure eventually gets replaced, and it sort of remains there as a kind of carapace, a hardened carapace over the real activity. Like the monarchy is a good example. You know, the monarch used to be the person who ruled the country. The monarch still exists as a sort of ceremonial function, but it got replaced by parliaments and by the idea of representative democracy. Well, that actually needs rethinking now as well. I don't mean that we abandon democracy, but we don't expect it to happen at that level any longer. Yeah. That level has hardened and kind of corrupted, I think.
Yes.
And where you're seeing democracy now is a lot in cities, for example. So mayors suddenly become very, very important, much more than MPs, I think, now. Mayors and people who govern regions and so on. Yeah. National governments seem to me pretty stuck right now, and it's partly because of this expertise problem. You know, it's interesting to me that the country that's making most headway in dealing with climate change now is China. Yeah. And China is a government of engineers. There aren't a lot of ideologues in the Chinese government. They're people who've studied something and know how something works.
So I was going to say, related to this, so our capability to do geoengineering. So one of the things that I find most exciting now is commercial space flights, which is one of the things that's is going to be a prerequisite if we're going to start wanting to monitor the Earth better and also start to engineer it. And that's on a positive note, the fact that we now have reusable rockets that can fly into space. So it suddenly makes access to space cheap. So when we talk about these things, perhaps building giant sunshades or whatever it is that we end up having to do in order to repair the damage that we are causing now because we're useless at making decisions and respecting science and facts and so on, that sort of engineering is progressing very fast, actually. So what was science fiction is, I think, just about to become reality in the next 10 years, because we're going to have the infrastructure in Earth orbit to operate quite cheaply. And I think that's going to revolutionise our civilization. But they also said, a lot of people have also said that this is the point at which we make a decision. So we either become an interplanetary species or we probably had it. Yeah. So in many ways, if we get through to 2039, if we make it through there, I think we're effectively immortal as a species. I think in the sense that we won't be confined to one planet.
But these are the hard yards that we've got to get through to get there. When you were with Jeff Bezos, I'm going to finish this here. I'm going to play a song next. But when you were with Jeff, did you ask him where my leopard skin onesie was that I sent off for 2 weeks ago? Because it's bloody not turned up.
He was wearing it.
We are here. That's all you need to know. You don't need to know anything else.
Can I just interject there? Because you can't define... There's no such thing as absolute space.
I absolutely knew that was coming.
It's very intimately related with the fact that you can't tell whether you're moving or not.
I realise that there is no fixed point in the universe, Brian.
No, but for example, if you were bouncing a ball on the table now, you might ask yourself the question, well, when I catch it again, has it returned to the same place in space?
That's a good question.
And it hasn't.
It hasn't.
Well, from our perspective in this room, it has. But of course, from someone, let's say, watching the Earth orbit around the Sun at 18 miles a second, then if it takes a second to bounce, then when you catch it, it's moved 18 miles. And so who's right? And the answer is nobody's right. Therefore, there's no such thing as absolute space. So you can't say we are here because it's a very subjective statement. So I suggest you rewrite your introduction and start again.
Let me say instead then that although relative to West London, for instance, or the people of the planet Earth, we are in the stable space of Brian Eno's studio, to somebody looking from the Andromeda galaxy or somewhere like that, we've moved, even since Brian said that, about 220 or 30 miles to the right. But I was going to try and get a question in about the two Ronnies. But that didn't work, did it? I'm going to persist. We went from the future, and then we just went back to the extraordinary past.
In relativity, there's no such thing as simultaneity. So there's no unique definition of now.
That's the Turing shroud test.
Okay. So really, future and past are also, in a way, subjective.
I mean, how much fun is he at Christmas? I mean, I can't begin to imagine the fun that we must have.
I'm just asking you to be respect relativity. I want your sentences to be relativistically invariant.
Oh, yes, if we're expecting our politicians to be scientifically literate, I suppose we should be as well, hey, Brian?
Yes, absolutely. I expect my... what are you? Are you a DJ? Is that what they call you?
How dare you? I'm a broadcaster. I'm not a
right?
DJ. But, well, okay then. Well, let's not say it's the past or the future, because those are completely human concepts. But to go from where my position is the future, which was what we were talking about, the year 2039, let's go back, relatively speaking, to the past and ask you a really ridiculous question. What is your favourite old go-to comforter when it comes to Christmas, when it comes to Christmas music, films, television? You know, the two Ronnies, Morecambe and Wise, Chaz and Dave's Christmas special on YouTube. That's what I always like to watch. It's a serious question. What is your sort of comforting viewing from the olden days, or listening?
The most comforting music that I know is the Wailers. The first couple of Wailers albums. I don't listen to them very much, though, because I don't generally want to be comforted.
What an answer that is. I obviously am the kind of person who needs a hug a lot. So that's interesting. We're here in West London, actually, and there's a big connection to Bob Marley around here, I think, isn't there? I think that, in fact, near where I live, in the sort of Kensal Greenway, I think he'd recorded some music over there, and he's got a big connection to the area, isn't he? You were kind of around at that time as well. Did you ever have any
we used to work in the same studio.
Did you?
What was then Island Studios on Basing Street.
Yes, round the corner.
Now a block of flats.
Oh, God.
But that was an old church that Chris Blackwell had bought, and in fact, quite often there were two studios there, and quite often I was in one and Bob Marley and band were in the other. It's a lot more fun in their studio than mine, I can tell you.
So did paths cross though? Did you ever have a cup of tea together?
Yeah, we did.
Did you?
I used to bump into them and we chatted a little bit. I lent them a guitar once.
Small Claims Court.
Small Claims Court, definitely, that's one. Yeah.
And what about you, Brian? Do you look for succor in things in the old and the ancient?
No, I don't want to be comforted either. I just watch
me again. Two uncomfortable men.
Yeah, I watched 2001 or something like that because that actually did. I mean, that does remind me of it used to be on at Christmas.
Yeah.
And if you want to be uncomfortable, you want to be reminded of our fundamental insignificance and yet the unlimited possibilities that the human race has.
Yeah, that's the kind of discomfort I like.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to be reminded of ideas that seem irreconcilable, such as our fundamental smallness and fragility and yet great value.
That's it. That's lovely. A very interesting way to say it, though. I don't particularly look to be comforted, because a lot of people, and I include myself in that, when faced with the stark realities of a cold and thinking universe and the various difficulties we find ourselves in the modern world, I like to hide under a duvet and watch old reruns of the Two Ronnies. But you're saying that you guys, it's just not for you. You that's not the way you think.
Well, most of the time it's just not for me. I did watch an unusually rare broadcast of Pete and Dud from Australia. Oh, and funnily enough, that same evening I watched a broadcast of you from Australia, Brian, which was very, very good. You were talking to the Prime Minister on some panel show about modelling climate change, and he was saying that, you'd got it all wrong, and because he
wasn't the Prime Minister, he was a senator.
Is he another populist leader who doesn't really believe in climate change?
Yeah. Not only that, he believes that that NASA and all the other agencies have been faking the data to, for some reason, make us all believe this thing.
These are the things I don't understand about especially we talk about NASA, these conspiracy theories. Some of them are grounded in, you can see why people might want to believe them. I mean, climate change is a good one, but it scares people and people have to do something. You can see how they try and, so like you said, that's one of the reasons you shouldn't be comfortable, actually. You seek comforts, because that's what you do, is seek comfort in ignorance. And being ignorant about the universe means you'll have less time to enjoy it, basically. But actually, I think that if there is such a thing as there isn't such a thing as the meaning of life. The meaning of life is it's meaningless, actually, which is very important, because the brief period you have alive and being the wonderful thing. We often talk about Richard Feynman, who said that we are atoms that can contemplate atoms. I think that really to have insight into the value of life, you have to understand that it's finite.
Yeah, that's what gives it the meaning.
Yes.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, I must admit.
And that's uncomfortable.
Yeah, it is. Just very much like these brand new shoes that I got for Christmas that I'm still trying to wear in.
I've just realised it's not a very good Christmas message, is it?
Not really, no, to be honest,
it's absolutely the opposite of what Christmas actually is.
I was trying to grow up towards something Christmassy, but I failed.
Isn't it a celebration of some kind of comfort blanket? So that's what it is.
Well, we can celebrate the fact that, as far as we know, we are the only intelligences in the universe.
Yeah.
Which is astonishing, I think, that we still don't know of any other intelligent life in the universe.
This is it. This is Six Music. We are here with Brian Eno and Brian Cox. I'm Shaun Keaveny, and this is the Six Music News.
Six Music.
Six Music.
It's automatic. I need to unload under the pressure. Got me love the road. Fall into fashion. Fall out again. We stick together. 'Cause it never ends. Here comes a low. Here comes everything.
Artists can sometimes give us an interesting perspective regarding this most wonderful art form, music.
Keris Matthews.
Bobby Womack said, I will play my part by singing the spirit into every open heart. At Blakey then, it doesn't matter how complex you want to play as long as you swing and play from the heart. Perhaps when music has been shouting for so long, a quiet voice seems attractive. That was Brian Eno. Every Sunday, we plunder the archive for some of the best interviews and fabulous recordings from all genres and eras.
Keris Matthews on BBC Radio 6 Music.
This Sunday morning from 10.
Quali say, everybody act according to the season that they born in. Some in the night, some in the morning, some at noon. Some in winter, some in June. It's all cool. It's a natural role. Science is a jewel. For me and mine's yours and you. Let's move. Say a little bit about mine, yo. I was born in a season where the world was quiet and cold. Celebrations were going on. Some were happy, some were sad. Some felt bad from being good. Some felt good from being bad. And feelings pass and change, but they never leave. They here to stay. Holiday, holiday, happy birthday. Teenage love, the first cut, run deep. So long flesh, this is the Brooklyn streets. Year of the ox, 7 and 3, MD. The history. Come on. Every soul got one day. Yes. It's where you been and where you be. And without understanding, you cannot proceed complete. The start then the end. Then it just go round again. Again. Again and again, brand new. Again and again, so fresh. Again and again, blueness.
I was born in a decade of decadence, when it worship what they have. Ford was president, do the math. War was ended when the North Vietnamese stormed the city of Saigon. We was like bye, we was gone, let bygones be bygones. I'm gone, spread love, it's the Brooklyn way, where they hug you with the firearm, child on. Like new school clothes, Black Star officially. Smash when we do shows, facts, no mystery. I'm down with the crew like Mussolini in Italy. I rock with the roots like the Giventry. Powerful bigotry at work, me and my people got history. These rappers dumb it down considerably. We get it poppin' like a hit chorus. The flow is historic, they can't get rid of us. You pick with us, and we lay the law like Leviticus. 10 years ago we made history, so they miss us.
And don't call it a comeback in particular, even if it blend into ephemera, I fade into peripheral. Transmission of the minister's original will broadcast clear without the minister. Black Star, so top burning, soul temperatures and ministers. Alkalines, aminos, and minerals, essentials served over time signatures. It's miracle material remembrance right now for
everness. We're here. We're in a secret location in West London, Brian Eno's studio with Brian Cox and Shaun Keaveny, two very intelligent men and one struggling man, desperately trying to keep up. It is, let's not forget though, we just got, if anything, a little bit too cloying and Christmassy in the last section, but while we're on the subject of Yuletide and the festival itself, I want to talk to you about the best presents to buy you, Brian's. As we are here, you might as well talk us through some of the little contraptions that you presented to us at the beginning, Mr. Eno. This thing that's strapped to one of your girders here was built by a friend of yours, and it's a double pendulum.
Yeah. So I started to get interested in double pendulums a couple of years ago. I bought a little one, which we have sitting on the table here. So a double pendulum is just a pendulum with another pendulum attached to it. And so it's therefore two versions of a simple system. A pendulum's quite a simple system, really. But the interesting thing is that if you put two of them together, so one pendulum is hanging off the other, you get very, very complicated, what's called chaotic behavior. You just can't predict what that pendulum is going to do, even if you try to drop it in exactly the same way each time. In fact, even if you do that quite scientifically and you drop it exactly the same way each time, the minute differences of each drop, which may be to do with air currents or to do with the grease on your hands or whatever, will mean it will have a completely different path in its course until it runs down to zero again. So I've got a little one here sitting on the table. It's about 8 inches high. but I wanted a bigger one because the little one moves too quickly to really see what it's doing. So now I have a, what is that about?
It's a big one.
2.5 meters.
You just made me think of something which is, I'm going to pretentiously try and grow up for something.
Is it that the period is proportional to the square root of the length? Is that what you were going to say?
Thanks again for ruining the punchline. That's exactly what I was going to say. No, you physicist. I was actually going to say, you take something very predictable, like the path of one pendulum, and then you put another one and it becomes very unpredictable. You know, it reminds me a little bit of collaboration. It reminds me a little bit of, it's an allegory for what you both do, actually, which is, you know, it's a little bit like what we're doing here to some degree, but is that the nature of collaboration as well? You take one person who's quite creative and they've got quite a lot of ideas, but then you put another person who's creative in with them, and does the thing go off exponentially from there?
Yeah, I think, well, the reason I like this thing so much is because it's a corrective to an incorrect intuition that we have. Our intuition is that if you put a couple of simple systems together, you'll get a slightly more complicated system, maybe. But in fact, you get a dramatically, radically more complicated system. So we have an intuition that is incorrect. I have a little file of incorrect intuitions because I think they're very interesting. That, for instance, we're very bad at statistics and probability. We don't understand them as humans very well. So we have an equipment in our brain that is incredibly good for a lot of things, but not very good for certain things. And complex systems is one of them. We just don't grasp them. They don't make sense to us. Something that doesn't scale up linearly doesn't really make sense to us.
And the solar system is such a system. So we tend to think of planets in orbit as a sort of Newtonian clockwork that just sits there forever. But actually, when you've got more than two objects in orbit, then they behave in this way. And in fact, the solar system, certainly in it's kind of what we call metastable now. But so most of the simulations we do of it suggest that it will remain this way until the sun runs out of fuel. But in some of the simulations, Mercury in particular gets thrown out into the outer solar system. And we're pretty sure that early on, Jupiter and Saturn actually moved inwards and then interacted with each other primarily and then moved back outwards again. And that's probably one of the things that stunted the growth of Mars. So Jupiter came in close to Mars, swept out some of the sort of gas and dust that was in that region of the solar system and prevented Mars from getting big, which is one of the reasons why Mars is not a habitable planet today, although there might be microbes below the surface. So all this movement of the solar system, it's called chaotic movement, and it's the same as the pendulum. When you get, essentially that's three objects acting under the gravitational force, which is really simple in some ways. I mean, that's all a pendulum is. It's an object acting under gravity. But you stick another one on it, and it becomes chaotic, which just means that the initial, as Brian said, the initial conditions, the way you set it up initially, critically determine how it behaves in such a tiny way. And basically with these simulations of the solar system, if you set up the solar system as it is now, and you move Jupiter by, I can't remember what it is, but let's say you move it by 100 miles, or 10 miles or something, and then set it off, you can get a very different outcome as a prediction of the future.
Is that something that you're trying to create when you're in the studio with, you know, you've worked with everybody from, you know, John Hopkins to David Byrne and David Bowie to Anna Calvi, and you know, your oblique strategies, is that part of all of that? That this seems to be some kind of version of it where you're trying to harness the unpredictability of humans working together.
Yeah, well, I think the only point of working with other people is that they make you go somewhere that you wouldn't go otherwise. That's the thrill of it. It's not a thrill if you take control of the situation and just do what you were going to do anyway. The thrill is suddenly getting a chemistry that you didn't expect. I think chemistry is a very good metaphor, actually. So I remember talking to a band once who were complaining that one of the players didn't really do anything very much. You know, he was always late. And I started thinking about how steel is made. You know, iron is one material, but if you add 4% carbon to it, it becomes steel. And if you add 1% vanadium to it, becomes some other kind of steel. So it's not to do with quantity, it's to do with the chemistry of particular contributions, and everybody in chemistry knows that to be true, but we haven't actually understood that that's also true of how people interact with each other. It's not really the time that they spend interacting, it's the particular quality of the contribution and what difference that makes.
I love that. Such quite an inspiring thought, actually. It's not, like you say, it's not always about the amount of time in the sort of system that you're in. It's just that influence that you make while you're in there. It's quite fascinating. I've got a question here. Now, right at the beginning, we talked about did this whole concept come about because of the very weak puns of the three wise men, or the different Brians. Last year we had an extra Brian in orbit with us. Shooting across the stars, shooting across the firmament like Halley's Comet. It was Brian Blessed, of course. We have a question from another eminent Brian, and it is from showbiz legend Brian Conley. And he asks this.
Hi there, this is me, Brian Conley, wishing you all a very Merry Christmas. I am appearing this Christmas in the pantomime Cinderella at the Bristol Hippodrome. But I, Brian, would like to ask you, Brians, what would happen if aliens contacted us? Could we decode messages, and how do the Brians think the human race would react with the news of life on other planets?
I think he means...
Go on.
I suspect, first of all, he means intelligent life and not
intelligent
microbes, because we may well discover microbes on Mars. We have a couple of missions going out in the next 10 years, the next decade, which, and the reason they're designed to search for life on Mars is because we think there may be life on Mars, but it'll be subsurface and it'll be microbes. The human race should react in a very powerful way and have a powerful response to that, because it would mean we're not alone in the universe. It might not actually mean that there were two origins of life in our solar system, because we know that material moves between planets. We have Martian meteorites on Earth. So it could be that there's only one origin of life in the solar system, and it could have been on Mars, or it could have been on the Earth, or it could have been somewhere else, and it moves around. But that's not really what he means. So people won't... I think that would just be interesting to people, that there are Martians, But intelligent life would be an interesting question as to how people would react. I could say that we would probably be able to decode the messages, because there is a universal language, which is mathematics, and so the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter is pi, wherever you are and whoever you are. And so there are the way that atoms radiate are the same everywhere. The laws of nature are the same. So there will be a common language, which is basically science and mathematics that you could use to communicate. And that's what we do when we broadcast signals out. We've done it occasionally from the Arecibo radio telescope in Puerto Rico, for example. Famously, we sent a signal out into interstellar space. And the key to decoding it was something called the 21 centimetre hydrogen line, which is the wavelength of radiation from hydrogen atoms.
So that's fair to say then that when eventually, I prefer to use the word when, the human race comes into contact with intelligent life from another part of the universe, that intelligent life will have had to develop its own Einstein, essentially, to work all this stuff out.
Well, I think there's some interesting discussions about this, because I made an album called Another Green World. That was based on the idea that actually there weren't many developmental paths that intelligent life could take, and I imagined us going off into space for hundreds of years and seeing a little planet somewhere. Oh, it looks like there's life there, and we land, and it's actually identical to here. There's Oxford Street and there's Sainsbury's. I just thought that was an interesting idea, that that perhaps the developmental paths that can be taken are much narrower than we think. That it might not be that they'll be
wildly different.
They might not live in water, because certain things about our intelligence wouldn't have developed in a water-based situation.
That's a
and in
great
fact,
idea.
So one way of thinking about it is that if there is life in the rest of the universe, we'll recognise it quite easily. It'll be a lot like us. That kind of seems to make sense to me.
Yeah.
But there's another bunch of theories that say, no, actually, there might be intelligent gas clouds. Something you won't even recognize. It won't be something that can be decoded into language or measurement or something.
And the other possibility is that life, so organic life, maybe it basically obeys the laws of physics. As Brian said, it's probably going to look similar, probably. But if you think about what's going to happen to us as we progress and our technology develops, going back to what we started talking about, artificial intelligence, our machines, the machines that we create in the future, may be absolutely unrecognizable. They might be nano machines. They might be very small indeed. And so the things that we send out into the universe are unlikely to look like us, actually. It probably won't be us. Transporting biology around in the universe is kind of very complicated, but sending little computers is probably the way to do it. So we might not. That's there are two arguments we've talked about before. The Fermi paradox, which is the idea that the galaxy has been around for so long, and there are 200 billion stars in the Milky Way. It's been around for 13 billion years. Many of them have habitable planets around them. We know, in the sense that there are planets that are the right temperatures, have water on the surface, and so on. There's an estimate of 20 billion Earth-like planets in the Milky Way galaxy. So there's been billions of places over billions of years where life could have arisen to a civilization. And yet we don't see any sign of any civilizations. And the argument goes that if you imagine us getting over this blip that we're in at the moment and progressing on into the future, if you look, what would we look like in a million years if we carry on this trajectory? Well, we're going to be, first of all, unrecognizable probably, but secondly, we're going to be out there amongst the stars. And so you would expect that a civilization, at least one, had spread out amongst the stars and covered the galaxy, essentially. And yet we see no evidence of anything. So that could be because civilizations are very rare. It could be because civilizations don't pass beyond the point that we're at. So essentially they build nuclear weapons and that's it, roughly speaking. Or it could be that the advanced civilizations are unrecognizable. So there could be nano machines all over the place in the solar system. An alien civilization.
There's another theory as well, which is Geoffrey Miller's theory. I think it's Geoffrey Miller, who suggested that at the point civilizations are able to virtualize things, so they turn inwards. So basically, we're now in a situation where we don't have to eat fruit because we can have sugar, just pure. So all the things that creatures instinctively have done, we don't have to do any longer. We can do the virtualized version of them. And all of those things actually turn us inwards. We don't need to communicate with other humans. So Geoffrey Miller's theory, I think it's Geoffrey Miller, theory is that at the point civilizations would reach a point where they stop broadcasting, they stop sending anything out. They're sending it all back in.
Well, you said that we won't know what aliens look like, but they'll look like Martin Landau in Space 1999. I think that's clear to anybody.
He wasn't an alien though; he was the commander, the human.
No, but that's what we're going to present to the alien community. We will be Martin Landau in Space 1999.
I see. So it flares.
Yes, in flares. And I just wanted to quickly. I was going to get on to great Christmas presents because we've got the double pendulum.
There's one actually thing that just occurred to me about that discussion, which is that this is one of the arguments that goes into the "are we living in a simulation" type hypothesis. Because what you do is you become virtual as a civilization, and you start running simulations of your own civilization. Such that you could, maybe for fun as a game, but also to maybe understand your own history and things like that. And when you do the sums, when you think about that, then it becomes overwhelmingly likely that we're in a civilization. A simulation. We're in a simulation.
I remember this
one. And people argue about that. But what's really interesting is reading the papers. There's a guy called Nick Bostrom who's done a lot of work on this. And he challenges you. He said, I'm not claiming we're living in a simulation, but follow this logic and pick holes in the logic. Just follow the argument. And it is actually quite difficult to pick holes in that argument. And it almost follows from this idea that we turn inwards and we become virtual and we start running simulations. We do already. We run simulations of the whole universe. They're very coarse simulations of the universe, but that's how we do cosmology.
Okay.
So it could be that we're listening, that we are living in a simulation.
If we do that, could I choose Way of the Exploding Fist of Fortnite, because that is to my mind a much more edifying experience to live through. Just basically spending the rest of eternity karate chopping people in the throat. I don't think that's the point that he was making.
That's not going to get in the broadcast. If you're listening to this now on Boxing Day, there is so much of this that has not got into the broadcast because it's wandered off into so many different directions, none of which are appropriate for Boxing Day on BBC Six Music.
Yeah, you should have heard the original. You should have heard the demo.
This was 6 hours long, and 4 hours of it is absolutely unbroadcastable. It would bring the BBC down, if not the country.
Not again. Again, Merry Christmas, Lord Hall. Well, there you go. I think that fulsomely answered Brian Conley's query there, and once again we brought it around from 2 Brians to 3. Can we at this point ask one of you, and we'll ask the other one for another record to maybe close the show, but to take us up to the next junction, a song to play and why you would like to hear it?
Okay, I'll make a suggestion. Lovely song. You may have already played it. It's called Black Willow by Loma. No. Have you heard of that?
No, I didn't. Don't think I have heard that.
It's a beautiful song. I had it playing on repeat. I don't often do that these days, but I just kept listening to that song over and over.
Because I rode up to the edge, because of life I lived to stay, because I could not find the words, I could not hold it in my head, I make my bed beside the road, my body glows inside the smoke, and I'm wild enough. I carry a diamond blade I'm living on, all defenses down, and when I walk, I carry a diamond blade. When you said serve you, I will not. Because the spark is in the air, I let it go up by itself. My tongue is itching with the sound. You're always singing in my head. I'll make a home inside the wind. Stars are burning in the west, and I'm living on. I carry a diamond blade I'm living on, to pull the fences down, and when I walk, I carry a diamond blade. I will not serve you.
Six Music.
It's just after 3 p.m. on Boxing Day, and I'm here with Brian's Eno and Cox, and amongst other things, we're playing with the double pendulum that you might be able to occasionally hear accompany us. I was going to pull out the old kaplunk, a bit of ball momentum.
Are these all metaphors?
Or they're not metaphors, and they're not euphemisms either.
Yeah, and I don't want you pulling out your kaplunk here, please.
I didn't even see that one coming. But we, at the end, just a moment ago, I was just saying, if you've got a device for Christmas, I did want to ask a question about that, about the idea of the internet, about the idea of 4G, Wi-Fi, about where we are with technology. Is it important for humans to get off grid sometimes, or do we now accept that we're constantly on the grid, and we accept that that is part of human life going forward? And should we just stop fighting it? Because I know as a parent, I spend a lot of energy trying to keep my children off devices and things. I myself am on my device a lot, far too much, I keep thinking. But is this kind of futile? Should we think of it as just part of the next evolution of human existence?
Well, I think it's a mistake to think that things continue linearly. I mean, there was a time, only 100 years ago, probably a little bit more now, when London was full of horses. So we always tend to think that if a trend is in place now, it's going to carry on pretty much in the same way. I think social media could kind of collapse in the future.
Really?
I don't mean that people will stop using those forms of communication, but I think they might stop being fascinated by that weird kind of friendship. It might stop seeming very real to people after a little while.
I've heard people say that and it's something I've clung on to, that the digital generation, the generation of my children, for instance, who have only ever known that technology, they will grow a maturity with it that perhaps us part analog people don't have, that we just see that we're the doomsday makers, like you say. It's like when Elvis came along. Well, that's the end of civilization, isn't it, the dirty swine? We're all going to be fornicating in the street. And it didn't really happen. Perhaps that's what's going to happen.
It might become socially unacceptable to sit there with these devices. Maybe it will be. It almost is, and it.
There's no etiquette for them. They've appeared so quickly that we haven't evolved any etiquette for them at all. So, you do see couples sitting in restaurants, both separately on their phones to presumably other people.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Maybe that Wi-Fi becomes a thing that you don't have in restaurants. You can see society evolving that way.
A bit like no smoking, for instance.
Well, exactly.
Oh, that's a good
and in
thought.
fact, somebody mentioned a club to me yesterday, a club in North London somewhere, where when you go in, the first thing they do is stick a sticker over the lens of your phone, so that if you're in that club, you're not being observed and photographed and going to end up on social media somewhere. So I thought that's the beginning of a kind of etiquette, saying that isn't appropriate for this place.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you should say that, because I don't want to speak about adult themes at this time of the day on Boxing Day, so I'm going to be very careful. But there was a story just a few weeks ago, wasn't there, about how there has been a trend of predominantly males in public areas viewing inappropriate material. And this is, like you say, this is the start of the backlash, perhaps, isn't it? If people saying
on their phones?
In full view of other people. So it is, maybe that is part of what you're describing, a move towards a bit more etiquette, a bit more gentility around it.
And it would be a good thing.
I think it would be a good thing.
Undoubtedly.
Well, I think historically there are plenty of instances of things mushrooming into what look like huge trends, and the whole world's going to be like that forever, and then they drop off.
Fizzles.
A few people will carry on doing them.
That's made me feel a bit better about it.
Yeah, it might not be true in this case, but that's what I think could happen.
No, I think it is a reaction. It's a recognition that there is a problem, isn't it? It's a reaction to this, the beginning of an increase in social pressure, I think.
I think that's really interesting that you've both said that. We shouldn't keep you guys too much longer, really, because it is Boxing Day and we've got turkey leftovers to eat, and we've got to play with our presents. We've got the double pendulum for a start, which is genuinely endlessly fascinating. Who needs a TV when you've got one of those? But I thought I'd close with a question, which is, it sort of echoes back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, really. And I couldn't think of anything more Christmassy than this to ask as a final question. Is war an innate part of humankind and completely inescapable? Merry Christmas.
No.
Okay.
My answer is going to be no.
So it is escapable?
I think it's escapable. I think conflict or competition and argument and so on are obviously essential, but I think it doesn't have to end in war. As president of the Stop the War Coalition, I am obliged to say that. No, but I do think that what's happening now is quite interesting. Is that sophisticated countries are retreating from the idea of risking humans in war. Their own humans, I should say. They don't mind risking other humans, but gradually war is being virtualized, actually. And it's quite likely that the next big war will be finished in 2 or 3 minutes by people completely taking over cybernetic control systems. So, you might find that you don't even know that there was a war and it was won the day before yesterday until you suddenly notice that there are different people policing you and so on.
Because what are we even fighting over anymore? 100 years or so ago, or much less, it was about territory, wasn't it? It was about land, it was about resources. Even now, of course, resources are a thing that people very much fight over. How does modern warfare, what are we even fighting over anymore?
We were talking about spaceflight earlier, and there's a sort of thread of, you might call them idealists, of which I think Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are part of that idealistic vision of what spaceflight can do. And one of the things that they say is that if you think about what you mentioned, resources, it is a false notion that we have access to limited resources. We have access to limited resources on this two-dimensional surface that we live on, which is the surface of the Earth. But actually, the resources that we have access to are infinite. Even in the solar system, they're effectively infinite. And whilst we're not at the point yet where we have to go and access resources in the asteroid belt and so on, the very idea that we don't need to compete for energy and resources on the planet should be enough to begin to release some tension, because it's false. It is actually false when you start thinking about our position. Yeah. And so it's one of the justifications for going onwards to Mars and so on in the next few decades, is that the sense of possibility that opens up for the human race, just the idea that we're not confined on this small surface and therefore have to compete and fight amongst ourselves, might be enough to begin to diffuse those tensions.
That's okay. Let's see, because if we are just talking about the finite resources of this planet, of this globe, then you can see how the ultimate iteration of that is a global meltdown. But if we can just encourage that technology, which humans always will, and we can go off-site to get our resources and to get our energies, we could all coexist in.
And it sounds silly. It sounds a bit idealistic, and until you realise that, first of all, as we've already said, we now have cheap access to Earth orbit. But secondly, that there is the numbers, the statistics are quite remarkable. So, for example, there are asteroid mining companies now, and if you look at the prospectuses, they point out that there's enough iron in the asteroid belt to build a skyscraper 8,000 stories tall and cover the Earth in it. Right? Now, not that you
nice.
want, you wouldn't want to do that, but it's just pointing out that just that very idea that we have to compete for resources is actually false.
The problem, though, is the subjective experience that people have on Earth, and the subjective experience now is of massive inequality, and I think that really is that's the source of warring behaviour. There's not an absolute level. It's not about people being, because people are less poor than they were 50 years ago, for example. But it's seeing where you are in relation to where other people are, and that is the irritant that I think drives people to conflict. So that's what we have to deal with. And at the moment, we're trapped in an economic philosophy that not only says you don't have to deal with that, but even that it's good. That the level of inequality is part of the engine of change and progress. So we have to sort of drop that idea, I think.
Well, we're pretty much there, but we asked Brian Eno for a song earlier on. Mr. Cox, you've got a choice now. What's it going to be?
My choice is to use my choice to make a point, which is that it's a fashionable thing at the moment, isn't it, to say that we should not listen to experts and we should all have an opinion. And our opinion is as important as the next person, no matter what their qualification is. Yeah. So I'm going to make a point by handing my choice to the other Brian, who knows more than me about music and has a much wider experience, so that there will be a better informed choice. And let that be a lesson to everybody that's listening in society. That's what you should do.
Defer to somebody with greater knowledge.
Yes.
Well, that's very kind of you, Brian, but I'm not sure.
You can pass it to me if you want. I mean, just keep moving it like a hot potato.
Oh, yeah, actually, you're looking at me and you thought I was going to pass it to you, didn't you?
I did. My dander was up. Well, thank you very much.
Well, why don't we have one of those Wailers songs?
Oh,
that would be nice, wouldn't it?
That's a fantastic idea. the Wailers there, of course, suggested by Brian Eno, which was suggested because Brian Cox deferred to the greater musical knowledge of Brian Eno, because that's what we should all do. It's been, as always, a brilliant experience. It's been intellectually enlightening. It's also been a lot of fun. Thanks very much for hosting us, Mr. Eno. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to be here. Can we ask you a little bit about what both of you have got coming up in 2019?
Yeah, I am doing a lot of live shows, discussing some of the things we've talked about today, which is our place in a probably infinite universe.
That's a lot to go on there.
That's a pretty hard one to compete with. I think I might defer to you on that one. Yeah, that's what I'm doing too. That's exactly what I'm doing. Yeah, same as him. Yeah.
But you're constantly restlessly inquisitive and busy, and it's the 10th anniversary, as you say, of the Bloom app, which is out now. Well, it's been out for the last 10 years, but
there's a new one. It's called 10 Worlds. It's a whole new set of blooms, different variations on it.
And you're still doing the light installations as well,
and the music,
and the activism, and just generally being an inspiration to me at Six Music's Shaun Keaveny.
Thank you very much.
Which is a job in itself. Thank you again. It's been such a pleasure and a privilege. I hope that we can reconvene next year, but that seems frighteningly long off. But of course, it will be here in the flick of a switch.
Quick as that.
Yeah, the push of a button. Well, all I can say is thank you very much, Brian Eno. Thank you very much to Brian Cox, and we're going to see you next year.
Thank you, Shaun.
Thank you.
Have a lovely year.
Can I have a piece of that panettone cake now that I've been?
Yes, you
I've
can.
had an eye on for the last hour and a half.
You've been very good, so you can. Yes.